Everyone, good afternoon from Dubai. Is my audio clear? Can you hear me?
Yes, we
All right,
can.
thank you for the thumbs up. Welcome to our 70-second live webinar. My name is Mylin Chan, and I am delighted to be here with you today alongside the TDCC training team. We are excited to bring you another interesting topic today, from meltdowns to mastery and emotional regulation toolkit. On behalf of TDCC, we would like to thank our 209 advocates coming from 19 countries who registered for this session. To those who have joined us live here and on YouTube, thank you for your time and presence. We would like to acknowledge our registrants from Australia, Cairo, Cameroon, Egypt, Finland, from India, from Ireland, Jordan, Kenya, Lebanon, from Malaysia, Nepal, Pakistan, Philippines, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, from Sri Lanka, United Kingdom, and the UAE. So, wherever you are in the world, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Before we begin, let me share a short video about TDCC and our esteemed speaker for today. Thank you.
Welcome to the TDCC Community Live webinar.
TDCC stands for the Developing Child Center located in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, UAE.
Established in 2012, we have been providing personalized support to over 1,000 children. We have 60 dedicated and committed experts, and we work closely with parents and schools to ensure no child is left behind. We think different, we teach different. We empower, not limit children. Labels like autism, dyslexia, and ADHD are not relevant or perceived as disabilities, difficulties, or disorders that limit children's abilities. We believe that brilliance needs difference. The TDCC services are available in English, French, and Arabic. The inclusive educational services nurture and support the developmental and educational needs and help empower each child to reach their full potential. Occupational therapy assists children in performing and achieving important learning and developmental skills they need in life. Psychomotor therapy is a healthcare profession that is based on a holistic view of the person and is involved in the treatment of different disorders. Speech and language therapy assists children who have disorders of speech, language, communication, and swallowing. Psychology provides both educational and clinical services, including counseling and parenting. ABA therapy focuses on improving specific behaviors. It is commonly practiced as a therapeutic intervention for individuals with autism. Specialist learning support. We assist in developing the academic and social development of students who need support in all these areas. And we design and host local and international training and workshops for practitioners, parents, caregivers, and educators. Just like this one today. We have a few rules to follow during the webinar. Please remain muted while the speaker is presenting. Please give your full attention to the presentation. We will be sending you the replay, so you can review it anytime. Please be interactive if the speaker requests your participation. During the question and answer session, we kindly request everyone to type their questions in the chat box and the speaker will address them.
Welcome to TDCC's 70-second webinar, From Meltdowns to Mastery, an Emotional Regulation Toolkit. We are honored to welcome back Dr. Ruba Tabari as our speaker today. Dr. Ruba is a British-trained consultant educational psychologist with over 30 years of experience working with children, families, and schools across the UK and UAE. She earned her doctorate in educational psychology from University College London and is licensed by the Health and Care Professions Council, UK, the Community Development Authority, CDA, and the Department of Health, DOH. Throughout her distinguished career, Dr. Ruba has led pioneering initiatives in well-being, inclusion, and school development, including helping design Abu Dhabi's well-being policy framework for private schools and nurseries. Her work blends science with empathy, empowering educators and families to better understand and support children's emotional and developmental needs. Ladies and gentlemen, let's all please welcome Dr. Ruba Tabari.
Hello, Dr. Ruba.
Hello.
Thank you again. Thank you again for this opportunity, for this to be with us today for this session. You may now share your screen, Doc.
All right. I hope everybody can see my screen. Yes.
Yes, we
hello,
can.
everyone. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me today. I'd like to start by just inviting you to do a small exercise, a breathing exercise, to help us all arrive into the same moment and same place. So if I can invite you to take a deep breath in through the nose for 4, 2, 3, 4. Hold your breath for 7. And breathe out slowly through your mouth for 8. If we can do that together one more time, breathing in for 4. Hold your breath. And breathe out for 8. Right. I hope that everybody feels that they've arrived to the presentation and are fully with me emotionally, physically, and mentally. I would like to start today by mentioning that actually emotional regulation is one of my favorite topics to talk about, and it's something that's very dear to my heart. And I've been supporting families for several years now with emotional regulation. And today is really going to be about sharing what I've learned throughout the years of practice. And I hope that you'll find that it's going to be quite practical and actionable suggestions that I'll be giving you. I have to mention, though, that really in reality, an hour is not going to give this topic the justice that it actually warrants or deserves. So a lot of what I'm going to do might feel a bit like highlights today. I hope that it doesn't, but it may be for some people. And that's partly because, like I said, it will need many hours for me to get into the depth of what meltdowns mean, co-regulation, and really to expand and deliver on what tools we can use. But I do hope that by the end of this talk that everybody will go away with something that they feel is useful and that they can implement in their setting, whether it's in the home or in an educational institution. We can't really talk about behavior without talking, before I forget, we do have reactions next to the chat at the bottom. So it'd be great to know that people are with me. And as I say things around the presentation, as I'm talking to you, if there's something that resonates that you like, please feel free to give a reaction. That way I know I'm not just talking to the screen. Right, so back to what I was saying. It's impossible to talk about emotional development, emotional regulation, without talking and saying something about children's emotional development, how that connects with the brain, and then what we know about behavior and what we know about meltdowns. So it all kind of comes together to really help us understand how we manage them. So I want to start by saying a little bit about emotional development across the age range. So when we are thinking about supporting children, we need to be cognizant and we need to keep in the back of our mind what is appropriate for that age range. We can't expect children to be behaving and doing things that are not available to them in that age group. So in the early years in infancy, we know that the children develop basic emotions. They start to kind of feel joy, anger, fear, sadness. Of course, they're not able to label it at that stage, but we see those emotions from them. they do recognize caregiver emotions, and fundamentally, it's when they form good attachments. And attachment is a critical component of helping children develop emotional security and later on to be able to develop emotional regulations and to be able to form healthy relationships with other people. Later on, around the 3 to 6 year olds age, we get the labels about talking about feeling, and nurseries and parents are great at doing this in early years. Educational institutions are wonderful about introducing lots of fun books and helping children learn to label their feelings, because children feel things, they don't always have the words that go with it. So it's important to be able to teach them that. They also start to learn about empathy, emotional regulation, and they begin, importantly, to understand other people's perspective. If we're talking to a child about emotion and we're trying to explain to them about regulation or about the behavior, it's important that they're able to understand another person's point of view. As we move through the ages, we get to a little bit of an older age. We have the 7 to 11-year-olds, where they start to gain more emotional expression. They start to understand complex relations a little bit more, and they start to form peer relationships that shape how they feel and see the world. And it's interesting that it starts at the age of 7, and I'll come back to that later on when we're talking about how we support with emotional regulation. And then, of course, we have the adolescence, and that's where we have that intensity, self-awareness, questioning their role in life, trying to assess their own identity, trying to kind of create their own value system. And a lot of it comes from peer group as well. But it's also a time where they get to establish really good coping strategies and understand where we see that development of emotional regulation at its best. Let's take a dip. So we've kind of talked about the emotion regulation. So let's take a deep dive into behavior and emotion. So what do we need to think about there? The brain-emotion connection, like I said before, is very important. So I don't really want to talk about behavior and managing behavioral meltdowns without getting all of us on the same page in understanding where we are with emotions and the brain, as well as developmentally. So we talked about developmental stages. Let's talk about the brain-emotion connection for a minute. We know that I don't want to go into the details of all the brain components. However, I'm highlighting in the diagram here a couple that are important for us to think about. The first one is the amygdala, which is part of our limbic system. And the amygdala is in charge of emotions and feelings. So it's our reactive brain, it's our emotional brain. Sometimes when I talk to children, I say it's our emotional brain. And the amygdala is been with us for years and years as years. It's part of evolution. It is there to protect us. It's triggered when we feel a threat, when we're feeling uncomfortable, when we're feeling anxious. We particularly are aware of it when we have, let's say, the stronger, maybe more intense emotions that are less comfortable. I don't want to say bad emotion because there are no bad emotions, but let's say emotions that are a little bit less comfortable. So for example, happy would be a comfortable emotion. Sad is an uncomfortable emotion, but they're both emotions and we have to learn to adapt and live with both of them. But when we are under stress, the amygdala starts firing. And because the amygdala is a reactive brain, the amygdala doesn't have time to think. And that's where our prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for thinking, and our stop button, our reasoning shuts down because we don't need it at that point. We need to be reactive. We need to make ourselves safe. So the frontal cortex is less reactive. It sort of shuts down, the amygdala is firing, and it's a very impulsive part of our brain. And with young children, the frontal cortex, the younger they are, the less developed the frontal cortex is. So if we're thinking about that crossover between emotional development and brain development, what do we know? What is important for us to keep in mind when we're thinking about emotional regulation and teaching children about emotional regulation? We know that, like I said earlier, the amygdala is part of our limbic system. And we know that the amygdala develops really early in a child's life. However, the frontal cortex actually takes a lot longer to develop, and it's probably not fully developed until they're about 18. So if we're thinking about that, then we need to, that's a really important point to consider when we're working with children, because we've got this emotional brain that's really developed, but then we've got that reasoning brain that's still under construction. So how are we actually supporting the children in actually kind of managing the two? So when I hear questions about how do I stop a 3-year-old from a meltdown, or how do I manage a meltdown in a 5-year-old, those things really have to be in our forefront of our minds as parents and as practitioners, teachers, educators, because we can only ask of the brain what it can give us. And I'll come back to that again as I go through the presentation and I get to the practical tools. But I would like you to keep in mind that it is the prefrontal cortex is under construction for a very long time, whereas the limbic system is there early on. And this is why, for most of us, we see really intense reactions from the younger ages. We see the children having super meltdowns. They're very raw in their emotions, they're very raw in their reactions, and very quick, and sometimes quite difficult to reason with. So when we're thinking about behavior, so we've talked about the development, the stages of development. We've talked about the brain. We've talked about the amygdala and the frontal cortex and the interaction of both the emotional development and the brain. But what about behavior? What do we need to know about behavior that's going to help us to think about what we do with children? How do we support emotional development? And we need to understand that behavior is complex and is an interplay between what is happening within the individual, but also the environment of the child, the family, the educational environment, the experiences that they've had. We can't ignore all those. In addition to that, we also have neurological differences. So there may be students that have additional needs that, or are, you know, their mindset works differently. That affects how they react and view the world. And of course, we have other emotional states like anxiety. Maybe we have children who are naturally more anxious, who then may be interpreting the world and reacting to the world in a different way. So why does emotional regulation matter in the first place? So why has it become a buzzword? Why is everybody talking about it? Why do we need to work on it? Why do we need to teach it? And you know, it is very important because this is the part that helps children to manage their emotions and behavior. When we talk about emotional regulation, we mean how can I, no matter what's in front of me as a stressor, manage my emotions? And we talk about teaching children emotional regulation, but in reality, there are adults who are still learning how to regulate their emotions. It is not something that is easy. And one of the things that really I like to always remind people when we're talking about behavior and supporting behavior is that just because we tell a child not to do something does not mean that they're suddenly not going to stop from one sentence, right? So it's an active process of actually helping children learn how to manage difficult feelings, good feelings, easy feelings, how to manage confrontation, negotiation, time management, patience, delayed gratification. All of this comes under the idea of emotional regulation. And it's always important to remember that it's a communication. So for many of us, the current theme that seems to run quite commonly across educational settings is that behavior can be explained by three processes. So we have attention seeking, we have avoidance or escape when something feels uncomfortable, and then we have sensory needs. I like to think of behavior a little bit more analytically and think, okay, well, what is this behavior communicating? What is it? What is this child's needs that are not met, especially if it's a meltdown? Where is the distress coming from, and how can I start to support? And the more that we can respond with empathy and the more that we can create a safe environment, the more likely that we're going to teach emotional regulation in a successful way. So what is the role of adults? What do adults do to support emotional regulation? Really a lot. And I wish I had a magic wand or a magic pill. But I find myself repeatedly sharing this with adults and saying, I wish I had an easy solution, but it isn't. It really does start with the adults. So the adults' reactions can either escalate or de-escalate a situation. The adult modeling emotional regulation becomes critical, and I'll explain why in a little bit. And then creating that safe environment where children's feelings are validated, but also contained, and they're supported in actually learning how to manage those emotions well is very important. That does not mean that we don't set boundaries, we don't have structure. So it's not about yes parenting or yes to everything as an educator that the child wants. It is about having that slightly analytical lens, really taking time to think about what is being communicated here. How can I support the child? What is it that I need to do? Other than the modeling, of course. I want to jump into the tools and suggestions because I'm sure that most people here are coming to talk about the tools and suggestions. And I also want to make sure that I have time for questions at the end. I want to thank everybody who sent in questions. There's so many, and I would like to get through as many as I can today. So when we're looking at the behavior, I'm going to talk about this slide, but I also want you to take, rethink or kind of recall what I had said about developmental stages, what I had said about brain development, what I had said about the amygdala, because for me, this is key. So when we are looking at behavior, we can see here that behavior starts at a calm level, then we have a trigger, and then there's the agitation starts when we start to see physical changes, the heartbeat may be accelerating, sweating, muscles tensing, and then we go into the peak, and then from there we go into the explosion, and then beyond that is the de-escalation when the child starts to come down again, and then we go into recovery. When I'm working with intense emotions, whether it's any of the uncomfortable feelings that I talked about, this graph becomes very important in supporting students and supporting parents in understanding what is happening and supporting educators really. So if I'm looking at this graph, where do you think, and please feel free to drop it in the chat box, where do you think intervention or support is best comes in? So if I'm trying, so if the peak is in the limbic system, where the amygdala starts firing, so between acceleration to peak to de-escalation, the child is in the limbic system. The limbic system is our autonomous nervous system. It's the more automated one that's responsible for blinking, your heart beating. We don't really have a lot of control over it. So we know that once the child, or adult for that matter, has hit that peak and getting into the acceleration peak and de-escalation, we can't really stop a meltdown. We can keep a child safe, we can stop them from hurting themselves, others, and the environment, but we can't actually stop the meltdown. So when we're talking about meltdowns and teaching emotion regulation and managing difficult behavior, where do we need to step in? Where is our window for intervention? Where is that happening? Please drop in the chat if you have any suggestions. So where is it happening? I can't see the chat, unfortunately. Where is the messages? I can't see them. That's a shame. Trigger agitation. Exactly. So when we are thinking about helping children calm down, we need to come in between calm and agitation. So when we are working with younger children, we are pivotal. The adult plays the role of actually calming the child down. Because like I said earlier, the child's prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. Their amygdala is fully developed, but not the prefrontal cortex, which means they're not very good at reasoning. They're just starting to understand themselves. They're just starting to understand perspective. So to put a lot of onus on them and to say, well, you need to do better, you need to learn to share, you need to do this when they're 3 and 4, is a very difficult exercise for them. So the adult at that moment plays a big role in actually helping manage emotions. It is our role to demonstrate, live that for them, show them how to do it, teach them how to do it before we're able to actually say a statement like, we all share here, which is a very common statement when we're encouraging children to share. But really, the brain development isn't ready yet for actually understanding the complexity of what that would involve, not in terms of what sharing means, but in terms of that emotional experience and self-control. That self-control doesn't necessarily exist at that age in a way that would allow the children to be able to manage those emotions. So then the younger the child, the bigger the role the adult is going to play. As children grow up and develop, say from about 8 onwards, when they're able to reflect a little bit more, when they have a little bit more self-control, we can then really share this graph with them and talk through with them about what is happening in terms of their behavior, what is going on for you, where do you feel the different emotions, and we talk through each one and we talk about what does it feel inside our body and what do we label it as, because that then is self-awareness for them. Remember, we need to stop it from developing into acceleration. So we want the child and the the adolescent, pre-adolescent, preteens to kind of think about what is happening in my body and what do I need to do to help myself. So when they're younger, we are helping them. As they get older, we want them to be able to help themselves. But that only happens by developing that self-awareness and understanding of what does that actually feel in my body? How do I know I'm actually going up that peak? How do I know that things are getting worse? So once we do that, then we're able to bring them down. So when we are working with younger children, we use this by thinking about planning and preparing. Remember, young children can't manage their emotions readily. So I need to, as an adult, model behavior, but I also need to plan for it. What am I doing ahead of time? If I know, so for me, understanding the child and what the behavior communicates is the first thing that I need to do before anything else. So what is that child's needs? What are they communicating? How can I avoid it? Let's say, for example, how can I avoid it or plan for it? Let's say, for example, a child cannot take the word no because they want everything their way. If you say no to them about something, they're going to react strongly, and then you have a meltdown and a tantrum, even though it's just a basic no. As an adult working with that child, I would want to observe and learn and understand, are there particular situations that are worse than others? Are there times that are more successful? When is it, what does it happen? And then if I need to say no to a child, I may then plan for it and think, okay, how can I avoid that situation? What can I do differently as an adult, not as a child, as the adult? What can I do differently as an adult to be able to manage that situation? And it may be that I don't say the word no, but I know that, for example, this child tends to be anxious, or this child doesn't like the word no, then I might use language differently and say, rather than say no, I will tell them when they can do something. That little change in my behavior as an adult can really diffuse a situation and bring the child down towards calmness. The other thing to keep in mind is sometimes when there is a need and there is a behavior being communicated and it's essential and meaningful to that child, we can't just eliminate it, right? We have needs in our lives and our needs need to be met. But what we can do is teach replacement behavior. So for example, I worked with young ones in nurseries where they want to get attention, they want to socialize with others, but they're not quite sure how to do it. So for them, the way to do it is to go and smack somebody or hit them on the hand or snatch a toy. Now, this creates a lot of problems at home with siblings, but also in an educational setup where obviously you get a fight or somebody crying, somebody screaming, and you get a reaction. Now, if I understand the behavior and I look at it not as attention seeking necessarily, but more of an analytical lens, and I say, well, actually, this child doesn't know how to socialize, they want to make friends, they're doing it in a way that is not supportive. So what can I teach as a replacement behavior? Because I can't stop their need. Their need to make friends is an important one, and it's a very crucial one, and I don't want to change that. But what I can do is think about what else can I teach them, and how can I teach them something more appropriate in a way, how to make friends that doesn't involve snatching toys. Another thing, so when we are looking at co-regulation in young children, like I said earlier, we are looking at the adult playing a crucial role. The adult needs to recognize cues, validate feelings, and offer calming strategies. Sometimes with the young children, they don't even know what is upsetting them, because what we see on the surface tends to look very similar, a meltdown. But really what happens underneath, what was the root cause of this meltdown, what's upsetting them, sometimes is difficult to understand. And I want to reiterate again and say, we cannot stop a meltdown when it started, because physiologically it is not possible. The other thing we don't do is we don't try and reason and talk children out of a meltdown by using logic. If you remember, and we go back to the brain, we're talking about the brain, the amygdala, and the prefrontal cortex. When the amygdala is firing, it is not our thinking brain. So there's really no point in me trying to reason with a child that's having a meltdown, screaming, and is uncomfortable, because that child is not really available to listen, and they're certainly not available to take on any of your logical suggestions. So we don't need to do that. What we need to do is keep them safe, ride the storm, get over that peak, and then come down to escalation. So the teaching time, when do we actually teach co-regulation then? If we can't do it during a meltdown, when are we teaching it? So we are teaching it when the child is calm. We're teaching it by planning ahead. We're teaching about managing our own reactions, by anticipating, being proactive in managing behavior before something happens, and by teaching replacement behaviors. And we do that when the child is calm, not when the child is having a meltdown. I was in a school the other day, and I was in a classroom, and I could see children. It was a class of, I would say, I think it was FS2, either FS1 or FS2. And the children were having choosing time, learning through play. And they were moving around, and I could see the excitement in the class building up. And I could see that as an observer, because while they were all playing in really nice ways and they're very healthily playing, I could see that the energy was their voices were getting a little bit louder, their movements were a little bit louder, the way they were playing with the toys was a touch rougher than when they started. So for me, looking at that, if I'm thinking of emotional regulation and I'm thinking of co-regulation, that would have been the time to come in as an adult and have a pause moment. There's nothing happened that was wrong. The children were not out of order. They didn't fight. They didn't do anything that was actually kind of inappropriate. But I could, as an observer, sense that I was losing that emotion regulation. So they were going into that excitement level that could potentially end up with the amygdala firing for some of them. And then very quickly, it could turn into somebody getting upset, somebody hurting somebody. And as it happened that day, actually, somebody eventually did snatch a toy and somebody got very upset. And after that fallout, the teacher intervened and got them to do something else. So watching it, if I was coaching and if I was kind of talking about it, which I am doing now, and I want people to do things differently, then I would say, once we sense the energy in that room changing, once we see signs that things are escalating, that is the time to come in and change before we get into that stage where we have to be reactive. So being proactive means picking up on these cues from the children, picking up on when something's happening. I would like to share why co-regulation is very important. And there is a science to it. We don't just talk about co-regulation and modeling calmness just because it feels good. We talk about it because there is a science to it. And it's something called mirror neurons. So our bodies synchronize with each other. When we're attuned to each other, our bodies synchronize with each other. And that happens to all of us, not just children, even as adults. If you have a friend who's very nervous and tends to be tense and negative, you'll find that if you spend a lot of time with them, you start to feel a bit agitated, and sometimes you don't even know why. And then you have people who have positive energy and you always see them and you kind of feel afterwards, I feel really good. And that's not because they're just good friends, but because sometimes the energy that they're giving you, the central nervous system, our central nervous system pick up from each other, and that way we start to feel each other's energies. So we're synchronizing through mirror neurons. And this is why we use it with adults. If I'm working with a child who's distressed, who's having a meltdown, I keep them safe. I slow my tone down. I slow my breathing. I ask the child to come to me, to calm down, try and breathe. I get them to a point where I can see that their amygdala is calming down, because their energy, the way they're using their body, their eye contact, if it's available to them, their tension in the body changes. I model breathing. I model calmness. I use my tone, the pace, my body language, and everything else to bring the child to calmness. Not just by saying stop crying, because that's not helpful. Or there's nothing to cry about, right? That's actually quite upsetting for children, because emotions, we need to validate emotions. If they're upset, they're upset. We can't tell them they're not upset. But we can use our body and our energy and our breathing and the pace of speaking to calm everything down. And then when they're calm, then you're able to access their frontal cortex and then start to talk to them about solutions. How can we do this differently? If they're sharing a toy, shall we use a timer? Shall we take turns? So then they're available to that reasoning, and they're able to then take it forward in a more supportive way and in a more positive way when they're engaging with their peers. And actually in sessions, sometimes I have a hyperactive child in front of me or an agitated child, and sometimes I don't address the emotion at all. I sometimes wait and just use my voice, my calmness, to see how long it would take a child to actually come to my level of energy. And it works like magic. So I recommend that you all try it after the presentation today. The next time you're with a child who's a bit on the kind of energetic side, who's a bit more feisty and vibrant, but you don't want that energy in that specific moment, I would really recommend that you sit with that child and not say anything, but try to really concentrate on your own breathing, the tone of voice, the words that are coming out, and see how long it takes. The longest for me, I think, was a child who was particularly hyperactive. It took him 10 minutes. But even then, he was very loud in the room. And even then, after 10 minutes, he just suddenly, his voice went down. I didn't even have to ask him to use what I call the indoor voice. He just came and settled with me using my voice and my body. So it really is super powerful, and that works for all children, in fact, even for adults. When our friends come in and they're upset, we don't tell them, why are you upset? Stop panicking. We tell them, oh, sit down, let's have a cup of coffee, let's have a cup of tea, tell me all about it. So you immediately work to calm down their amygdala and then get their frontal cortex working to help them settle. We often don't give children time enough to do that. We assume that they're going to respond to our commands or instructions, but actually what we need to do is do the same. We need to work with their physiology, not just the behavior that we see in front of us, and think, okay, calm down, calm down. Not in your words, but in your head. You need to be saying, okay, before I do anything, I need to calm the situation down, because then I can have a conversation. Before that, you're not going to be able to have a conversation. The other thing to think about is supporting older children. And this is really when it becomes really fun, because obviously older children their frontal cortex is a little bit more mature, and you have more work that can be covered about getting them to be more reflective, about getting them to understand the changes in their body and to understand how it happens. And I even go into I explain to them exactly what I'm doing today. I talk about the amygdala, the frontal cortex, about the muscles tensing. But with the older children, we can also talk about the triggers. We can talk about what is upsetting, and we can problem solve when they are calm. We can problem solve different ways of actually managing those feelings and what you can do to help yourself. So when you are feeling this way, what can you do to come out of that feeling? What can you do differently? Where can you seek help? Where do you find help? What helps you relax? We can also use things like the feeling thermometers or feeling, which are great for helping children gauge their reactions. So my reaction to a situation should be kind of in line with the situation and not exaggerated. And we help children by going through the emotion meter, by explaining those, what I feel at different levels of agitation and how I should actually display those emotions. And that's a really good way of working with older children. So from the age of 7 and above, they become really, really responsive to that. And obviously role playing and practice plays a key role. And when we are working with neurodiverse needs, it can be a little bit more complicated, but my feeling is that it starts with understanding exactly what the needs are. It's critical to understand the communication of behavior with neurodiverse children. Sometimes they don't all have the language to express themselves, even if they're older, and that becomes our role to really take time to observe closely, look carefully, and try and understand what is going on. What is the need? What is the behavior actually seeking? And it's not always as simple as, like I said, attention seeking, avoidance, or escape, or sensory. Sometimes it's more than that. Sometimes it is sensory, but not all the time. And we need to take time to fully understand what is going on. I remember working with an older student where I got an email from a school where she was defiant with the teacher, and ended up being kicked out of class, sent out of class because she started being rude and shouting. But the interesting thing to me was that the email started with a line about her coming in from play, and she was excited. And then there was an issue about wanting to write with a different color pen. So this girl was very anxious and had a little bit of OCD, obsessive compulsive tendencies. And so the teacher had missed that excitable sign and then went on to try and enforce the rule that, no, you can't write with this pen, you have to write with this pen. Of course, the child then reacted, and she was, very, she answered back and said, no, I don't want to do this. And he said, you're on behavior code 3. She goes, well, I'm going to go to behavior code 4. So she challenged the authority in a big way and ended up being sent out of class. So for me, the takeaway from that was, as an adult, like I said earlier, we need to be picking up on the signs. If I know that this child has these needs, neurodiverse needs, and I know that this person has a tendency to become oppositional, difficult, anxious, whatever the situation is, whether it's ADHD, autism, just anxiety, OCD, there are lots, there are so many different neurodiverse needs. It's about individuality and understanding individual needs. So if I am talking to this child, I need to be aware as an adult, hold on a minute, I need to observe and pick up on those cues and say, okay, this child's excitable, this is not good, I need to think calm. Again, how do I calm the situation down? It's not the time to be confrontational with that child, because this is not going to help me as an adult in managing the situation. So I just put here on this slide, I'm not reading the slides for you, I'm just talking generally, but obviously We need to address each individual needs with neurodiverse needs and understand where are the triggers, what is helping, what is making behavior more challenging. Is it the need for clear routines and expectations? Is there anxiety based? For many children, neurodiverse needs, anxiety is a big plays a big role, and sometimes it's under-identified and under-recognized, so it's something important to keep in mind. Do I need to create some movement? Movement is a great way to get rid of stress, the stress hormones that comes in when amygdala is firing. It's a great way to kind of get rid of that. So do I need to model emotional regulation? There are lots of different options that are available. I'm conscious of the time. I'll just quickly cover the last few slides. These are just ideas for emotion regulation. I mentioned the feelings thermometer already. I feel it's great. I would like to also say the tailored use. It's very important to think individually, not to overgeneralize about children, because the biggest thing is understanding what the communication is. And the more, there was a question in one of the questions that came up is, how do I do it differently so others don't recognize that I'm treating one child differently and so on. I'm a great believer in doing and actually having things in my class or in an educational, let's say in the classroom, which helps the child that has needs, but also helps everybody else. And a typical example would be if a child needs sensory toys or sensory tools or a stress ball or weighted blanket, I would have those available for everybody in class, not just for the child in question, because that helps everybody else, including my child. So I'm not differentiating. So when we're thinking about addressing emotional needs in a classroom, we can think of things that are supportive to everybody. And yes, they do help the child in mind, but they also help everybody. They don't harm anybody. So the more we can generalize tools like that, the better we are meeting the needs of our population. So some key takeaways, and I've put here observe, listen, and understand. Those for me are critical items. Not behavior is a communication, and until I can understand behavior, I can't really start to address it. I can't start to teach differently. So with the younger children, we need to label that behavior for them. We need to help them understand what the behavior is, not when they're having a meltdown. So it's very important that we don't coach. So many people try to help young people when they're having a meltdown and try to say, stop doing this, get up, don't do this, do that. It does not work. We need to do it when they're calm. So all the coaching, all the teaching, all the learning happens when the children are calm, not when they're having a meltdown. So remember that graph, we need to get in before the agitation. So we need to think about what is happening for that child, what affects that child, what do I need to do differently? Do I need to plan differently? Do I need to teach a replacement behavior? Do I need to use a different tool? Do I need to prepare them for change? What do I need to do to actually prevent the trigger? So start by observing to understand the communication, listen to learn about what the triggers are, understand what's happening for that child, and then you can do a really bespoke way of actually supporting that child and minimizing the behavior. Thank you very much for listening. I think we have about 15 minutes for questions. So please go, drop them in the chat. I'm going to try and find the chat again. There we go. I'll see if I can read the questions. So please feel free to drop them. And thank you for those who gave me a few ticks here and there to make me remember that you are all here with me. So when a child, so there's a question here that says, if a child is crying, is it okay to talk to them? It's okay to talk to them to calm them down, but not to teach them, not to start correcting behavior. So of course we want to talk to the children, we want to reassure them, we want to go down to their level, and we want to use our voice and how fast we're speaking to actually help them calm down. So it's not just the words, it's how fast we're speaking and how we're saying it. The tone of our voice will help them to calm down. When they calm down, then you're able to talk to them. If the adult is more stubborn than the child, well, like I said at some point, I wish I had the magic cure, but there is no simple solution to behavior and emotional regulation. It does unfortunately start with the adult and ends with the adult. And, when we think about adults and that our brains are fully developed, whereas the children's brains are not fully developed, it really is our responsibility to take control of ourselves as much as we can, and to be the adult that the child needs, and to be that person that they deserve to have in their life, whether as an educational person or as a parent. So connection before correction, exactly, perfect. I love that. I might steal that from my next slides. So I have a question here about saying a daughter is 5 years old. She gets very angry, screaming in frustration, banging doors. So with things like that, I would always try and, again, like I said, listen, observe, and understand. So you have to start with looking at what are the triggers. What is that behavior communicating? Where is that frustration coming from? So sometimes it's just about wanting their own way, but even if they want their own way, what is that skill that is missing? Is that child needing to learn how to negotiate, delayed gratification? What is it that I need to teach the child? So while this problem cannot be solved immediately, by actually focusing on teaching the skills when the child is calm and rewarding positive behavior, rewarding the behavior you want to see more of, the more likely that you will get change. Of course, at 5, the prefrontal cortex is still developing. So us jumping in, us manipulating the environment, us planning ahead will make a huge difference. So the child who is ADHD and doesn't listen, so and it messes the classroom and hits their friends. So this is a really interesting question as well. And do you remember how I talked about emotional regulation? So this is really, it works really well with ADHD. Because if you react, it sets them off even more, and you get into this dynamic of escalation, which doesn't help anybody. So 2 things to remember here. One is to plan ahead. So you have a team at school, in a school situation, and I would work with the team in the school, the senior leadership or the head of year, whichever works in your setup, to think about an actual risk assessment. So you think about, what do I do when the child is completely out of control? How can I help? You can't be responsible for it on your own. That's one aspect of it. So planning for the, let's say, if things go wrong and you can't change it. And then the other way is to actually work with the child. So most children will not accept to be corrected in front of an audience. So children don't want to be reprimanded in front of an audience. When you start to challenge a student in front of an audience, somebody has to win. And more likely than not, the child's not going to let the adult win. And if you win as an adult, it probably escalates to a point where it's unhealthy. So one good thing to do is to remove that child from the classroom and have quiet words with them outside. Allow them time to calm down, take them for a walk, give them something to do that changes the setting, and then allow them to come back in. So that's 2 things now. We've done the crisis assessment, the risk assessment. Who can come in to help? How are you going to call them? We've done the removing the audience, being able to talk to the child in a private manner, so then the audience is not there, adding yet another dimension that's going to make things worse. And then the third one is actually teaching the child skills. So a lot of children who have ADHD act before they think. There's impulse control difficulties. That's not to say that it's impossible to teach it. So there are things, for example, acronym SODA: stop, observe, decide, act. We can start to give them tools. We can role play when they're calm, different ways of supporting them. And remember, it's so important. Children want to please the adults, especially when they're young. Pre-10. After 10, it could be a little bit different. But pre-10, they really want to help. They really want to impress the adult. So rewarding positive behavior, mentioning positive behavior is going to be really, really important. And so the more we can focus on what is working, the more the child's self-esteem is improving, the more they're feeling positive about themselves, the harder they work at it. So we don't want to always be, especially if a child has ADHD or has difficult behavior, we don't want to spend our whole time reprimanding. That's not nice for anybody. It's not nice for the child, and certainly not nice for the adult. So we want to focus on actually helping focus on what is working. But at the same time, in the background, we're doing a lot of analysis, we're doing a lot of understanding, we're doing a lot of skill building. I'm just looking through some other questions. So consequences for behavior. So there's something about understanding and having consequences for behavior. I really, really like that question because I get asked for it a lot, and sometimes it's actually quite hard to know. Yes, you want to understand. And like I said in the beginning, we want to understand. The understanding is for planning differently. The understanding is for teaching the child how to manage triggers. The understanding is about jumping in and supporting the child if they're very young. It does not mean that there are no consequences. Consequences are important, and more often than not, it should be, sometimes we can use life consequences. For example, if I have ADHD and I forget to do my homework and I'm 12, I go in without my homework, it might help me next time to remember to do my homework. That does not mean that as the adult, we're not providing help in the background. The help in the background would be, let me give you a visual schedule of what you need to do when you're at home. Let me give you an area where you can work, which is clearly laid out and you have all the resources. Let me give you a reminder to sit down and do your homework. So we need to, in the back end, support the children. The whole aim of this is not to have the child fail, and it's not about control. There is no such thing. We're not trying to control the children. We're trying to give them the skills that's going to help them to be successful, because then we're all happy in a happy place. So it starts with understanding the behavior at a more complex level and more analytical level, but also then to start to think about, what do I need to teach this child that's different? So you've got your short-term goals, you've got your long-term goals. The short-term goals is trying to create a situation where you're avoiding those struggles. And then the long-term is, what skills do I need to teach the child so I don't have a continuous repetition of the same spiral of behavior? I think we have time for another 2 questions. I'm just scrolling. Thank you so much for all the questions. I'm really, really grateful for everybody taking the time to be here today, and also for sharing your questions and your thoughts. Replacement. So there's a question on replacement behaviors. So I mentioned one example, like what replacement behavior do we teach? So I mentioned one example before about, let's say I want to make friends, and I thought making friends is by going whacking somebody or grabbing a toy from them because I wanted their attention. So it is attention seeking, but it's not attention seeking for the sake of attention seeking. It's attention seeking with the purpose of making friends. So as an adult, if I recognize that, I identify that, then I could say, okay, let's role play. What can you ask people? What can you say? And give them different statements to use, for example, to help them to share that. If a child, to kind of create, to ask for friendship. If a child, the young children actually, I see it quite often that they use the physical side to, when they want attention from even a grown-up sometimes. So they tend to seek attention with their bodies because it's so effective. You get a lot quicker results with your body than it is with your words. So sometimes they revert to that as a default, but we need to teach them otherwise and to teach them to use their words. Other replacements, for example, coaching. Let me think. Let's say if the child, let's say I have siblings that always fight over toys, I then would say, okay, I would acknowledge the difficulty. I'm trying to think of replacement behaviors. I need a behavior to give you a replacement. Let's say interruption. I was working with a 6-year-old who kept interrupting and shouting over conversations. And then when the parents did not answer her, it would get louder and louder. And then she would get into a shriek. She would completely kind of have a meltdown because the parents were giving her attention and she's been shouting. So what I did to that child wasn't so much a replacement behavior, but I gave her a tool. I gave her a skill. So I said to her, you know, with conversations, normally when people are having conversations, there is a moment when people are quiet. There's a bit of a silence. And if you think about it, as adults, we tend to know that silence. We know when we can jump in and say something else or comment. We don't interrupt each other. There is that synchrony that we inherently know that children sometimes don't. So I said to her, you know what, wait for that silence. And then I said to her, wait, I was next to her. I said, wait, let's wait. And then when the silence came in, I said, this is it, just ask now. And of course, surprise, magic, you know, she asked and the parent responded because there was that silent moment. So it's not just always about replacement behaviors, but it's about giving them the tools to manage things differently. But what I really want people to take on from today is understanding the behavior is really, really important, but also teaching skills. What does that child need to learn to do differently, and to work with them when they are calm, not when they are excitable? Now, emotion regulation toolkit could be a breathing ball. Could be sensory toys, could be noise canceling headphones, could be any fun toys that are interesting to explore. It could be music that they can hear on the headphones. So what I love to do, a lot of schools do zones of regulation where you have different colors for different feelings. And what I love to do with children, if it's being used in the school, I like to follow the same system as the school, just to have alignment and it makes more sense for the child. I then like to use these and say, and individualize it. So if I'm working in therapy with a child, I would say, well, what helps you move from blue to green? Or what helps you move from red, where you're upset, to green, where you're ready to learn? And the children are very good at coming up. When we give them the space, they're very good at coming up with the solutions that work for them. We just sometimes don't give them enough space to actually share with us. And if a child can't finds it difficult to communicate that in words, we can then definitely do it through pictures or acting, whatever works for that child. So I know that I haven't answered all the questions. I want to just go to one more slide because I have a website here that might help. So here, I don't know if I can highlight it. I don't know if people, whoops, no, that's not what I wanted to do. Apologies. Right. In this box here, I don't know if people can see my mouse. There is a website. It is it's called autismhub.education.qld.gov. I don't know if people can see it easily, but this gives, it doesn't go into the depth of what I spoke about today, but it does give a little bit of an online tool for functional behavior assessment if people want to start through that journey to try and understand behavior. So you log in and then you go in and it kind of asks you different questions, you put them in, and then it can give you an idea of functional behavior. So in a school setting, it's a really good way to start. It doesn't take away from the idea that you need to really understand the individual children, but it does give you an opportunity to have a starting point in actually really thinking more deeply about the behavior. And I think I'm going to stop right now. And thank you so much to everybody who joined us today. And I believe there is one more thing to do, Mylene. I will stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Doc Ruba. Thank you so much for this beautiful presentation. Very insightful, very informative, and I think everyone enjoyed. And thank you again, Doc.
And it's nice to see some familiar names in the
Hello.
audience. Hi, Susie.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Sure.
First of all, I would like to apologize because we had a confusion in the timing because in Lebanon we changed the time in the weekend for I don't know what happened. So I just joined now. I would like to know if you're going to share the slides or the recording.
Mylene,
Yes, yes, Doc. Yes, Lina, very good question. We're going to send the recording to everyone who registered, and also the link that Dr. Ruba had shared. We're going to share that as well. We'll send it to you through email, and if you can follow us and subscribe in our YouTube channel,
Yes.
you can also find the replay there. And
Yes.
also in our
Okay.
social media. Thank you. Thank you for
Thank you
joining
so
us,
much.
everyone.
Thank you. Have a nice afternoon.
Thank you.
And you. And thank you again, Dr. Ruba.
Thanks, Mylene. And thank you, everybody, for all the reactions. I love them. Thank you. It's nice to know that people are listening and hearing. Sometimes when you give a presentation, you only see the screen. You forget the people on the other side. So fantastic. Thank you.
So we will be sending all the to everyone the replay. And we are also inviting everyone to join us again on the next webinar in November. This will be on November 14th to be exact, and the title will be the power of environmental sounds in early literacy from our learning support department. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Ruba.
Thank you. Bye.